Okay, jeg prøver den her. And I have to switch into English. This is a big moment for me. I'm directing the Danish Center for Mindfulness at Aarhus University, and this is like the highest point in my career, I would say, having Jon Kabat-Zinn here. It is a really big moment, and I'm so happy you're all here, that you are here, and I prepared a speech. Ladies and gentlemen, dear Jon, no parent can see a child be affected by stress and not feel the burden of guilt and frustration on their shoulders. No employee entangled in the disabling effects of stress can avoid the blame. No leaders can look themselves in the mirror with pride when employees have to take sick leave with depression. Today, our society at large creates challenges for ourselves that we cannot sustain. The burden of mental disorders continue to grow in all countries of the world. Depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. The burden is distressing for those affected and the people around them, and it is very costly to a nation. At its worst, depression can lead to suicide. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in young people. No single therapy works for everyone. We need evidence-based treatment. And since 2004, mindfulness has been recommended as a treatment for the treatment of depression by the NICE guidelines as a cost-effective treatment. The Danish National Institute of Health usually follows the NICE guidelines, but not in this case. In Denmark, we have access to medication, but not to mindfulness. Dear Jon, you have brought mindfulness into society, into healthcare, education, the military, prisons, leadership training, elite sport, and into the workplace. A few years ago, you went to Downing Street 10 and gave a talk on mindfulness. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the UK government has made the most ambitious plan called the Mindful Nation Report for creating better mental health for all Brits in the future.
That's the power.
Besides access to mindfulness treatment, the Mindful Nation UK report concludes that we need to take prevention strategies seriously if we are to reduce the burden of mental ill health and encourage the flourishing and well-being of a healthy nation. Mindfulness is one of the most promising prevention strategies. Dear Jon, my hope, and dear ladies and gentlemen, my hope is that we can do the same in Denmark. Creating better mental health results in the future by educating mindfulness teachers and make mindfulness accessible for prevention, treatment, and rehabilitation. And dear Jon, for 10 years I've been part of this worldwide mindfulness and research community that you have started. A community based on love, commitment, ethics, and wisdom. You have helped me trusting in my heart, and let my heart be part of my work in science and medicine, and not to make any separation between love, work, medicine, and practice. And I'm deeply grateful. Thank you for being here.
So I'll make it really short. It's really hard to come after Lone. What a wonderful speech. Thank you, Lone. So just to introduce Jon more formally. He's...
Introduce yourself first.
We know the speaking. Okay. I'm Pete, and I'm a psychologist and a PhD. And I had the great privilege of staying at the Center for Mindfulness 2 times half a year, so almost a year of my life. I stayed at John Center and saw how they worked teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction, and it was just amazing to see how available they were and how much love they brought to caring for people who were in difficulties. So that's my presentation. And I'm also working with Lone at the Danish Center for Mindfulness. So Jon, apart from being a very dear friend and a huge inspiration and such a caring and remarkable person, he's also a remarkable scientist, he's a writer, and he's an authentic meditation teacher. He holds a PhD from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He was in the laboratory of Nobel laureate Salvador Luria. But he decided another path, so he established the Stress Reduction Clinic in 1979 at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, which later became the Center for Mindfulness. And from the very beginning he developed the program Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, which has been thoroughly researched to the extent that mindfulness has become mainstream. And he has received numerous awards. And today I want to say on behalf of the organizers, which is the Danish Center for Mindfulness at Aarhus University, together with Vækstcenter from Nørresnede, it's such a privilege. It's such a privilege to have you here tonight, Jon. And I want all of you to know this is really important to my heart, and it tells a lot about the spirit of Jon. When I first met him, I said, could I come and stay at your center? And I was pretty sure he was going to say, no, we have a lot of work to do, and we were very busy. But he said, are you serious? Are you willing to spend 4 months at our Center for Mindfulness? That is such a privilege. We'll make it work. And in the same spirit tonight, he's giving this talk for free. As a benefit, I know you all paid for it. Some of you paid a lot. But he's doing it for free. He's not earning any money on this. He's doing it as a benefit for the Danish Center for Mindfulness. It's going to mindfulness research. He's doing it to benefit Vækstcenter, which is a meditation practice community here in Denmark. So, thank you so much. And on behalf of all of us, I'm so happy and grateful that he's here. So, please join me in a bow for Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's done this amazing work.
We're going down, down, down into wonderful. Hi, Anders. Well, it's wonderful to be here. And isn't it rather amazing that on a Wednesday night, in the middle of a work week, 1,000 people in Copenhagen have turned out for a talk about mindfulness. 10 years ago, no one would have turned out for the talk on mindfulness. At least not on a Wednesday night. You know. Maybe 30 people would come on a Friday night. But this is, in some sense, a sociological phenomenon, and very, very moving. And I feel like it has enormous promise. Before we get started on the evening, I just want to also thank Lona and Pete for all of the work that it took to make this kind of thing, and the event tomorrow, which will be a day of mindfulness for about 450 people, sort of like a mini retreat, make this possible. It takes an enormous amount of organizing, an enormous amount of energy, doesn't always go according to plan. But it is And so just in gratitude to you for doing that. And if, as was expressed, there was some concern about how steep the pricing was, I want you to know that that was a mistake. We want it to be a benefit, but we don't want it to be an exploitation. And so just apologize for that. I did not even know that, and if I had, I would have made sure that it was toned down and that students could come from less than they wound up having to pay. So I don't know, maybe you're just accumulating some extra good karma by paying the amount of money that you paid. And especially since it's a Wednesday night, you're coming out for mindfulness. Another way that I could describe that is you're all here for nothing. You know, if somebody were going to watch what was going to go on here from the outside, and there are actually journalists here, you know, sort of trying to figure out what this is, and we really drill down into it, they might actually get the sense that we're not doing anything. And would miss the subtle understanding that there is a very big difference between not doing anything and non-doing. Okay? And that non-doing has everything to do with a kind of intentionality that galvanizes life itself in the only moment we ever have in which to experience it, and therefore transforms our relationship to virtually everything and anything. And it's a little bit like tuning one's instrument before playing it. And I made that analogy this morning when we were talking with teachers and parents and in Odense and people who work with children. And the fact is that very often when children come to school, they're supposed to learn, but they don't necessarily know how, even how to pay attention. And often teachers, when they get exasperated, will yell at the class to pay attention, but they won't teach them how, because they actually don't know how to teach them how. So now, in the United States and in many other countries, and here too, very much so, the teachers themselves are bringing mindfulness into the classroom because education is not working unless there is some kind of deep intimacy, we could even say a love affair, with the unfolding of the curriculum. And it's an interesting question what the true curriculum is, whether you're in first grade or whether you came tonight in sitting in these seats. What is your curriculum? I mean, why did you come here? It's interesting to reflect upon. If you came to see my profile, here it is. You know, the other side. I doubt that you came to see Jon Kabat-Zinn. And everything that was said about me, it's not quite true. Okay? And the older you get, I've found, the more things you accumulate that people say about you, and people go, whoa. But it just means I'm older. And so you accumulate more stuff, and maybe even more credentials or more stories that people tell you about how you know what he did, you know. It's like, but part of it is just living life and putting one foot in front of the other, and things happen. And if you care about it and devote yourself to it as a sort of kind of love affair with whatever it is that you think is most fundamental, or never mind thinking, that your intuition, way underneath thinking, feels is fundamental, then maybe you'll nurture that in ways that will have unthinkable, inconceivable consequences. So having said unthinkable and then inconceivable, I want to at least acknowledge that I'm speaking in a language that for most of you is probably not your native language. And I understand that there's some degree of stress associated with that. So by the end of the evening, you'll probably be tired because listening to English, you know, might be tiring. Although my experience so far is that in my maybe 5 times that I've been to Denmark is that you folks speak better English than we do over in the United States. So I don't know what all the fuss is about, you know, why translation is necessary. But I use language, the language that I know, the languages that I know, in very specific ways, because what language really does is entrain minds onto similar kinds of wavelengths where we start to nod heads and go, you know that one? And when we really listen and hear, when we really attend and see, or smell, or taste, or touch. So there are a number of different ways, far more than 5 ways in which we can apprehend the outer world and the inner world. And mindfulness is really about relationality. It's about how we are in relationship to everything. Thoughts, emotions, sensations in the body, sounds. And you start to count up how many ways you know the world. It's not that many. Hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, that's the 5 senses. But then there's also, I mentioned intuition just a moment ago. That's kind of like a sense. What about proprioception? Do you know about proprioception? Have you heard that word? It's a fancy way for talking about the kind of non-conceptual knowing of where your body is in space. So at the moment, I can't see this hand. Can you see this hand? I can't see it. But I know exactly where it is. That's proprioception. It's a sense. You can lose it. You can also read it off other people, because when we make movements, for instance, this is a theater, and very often when we go to the theater, we are transported by other people moving on the stage. Sometimes it's called dance, but whatever it is, it could be transported by the movement of emotion or by the body, or, and we understand this in music and in the martial arts and so forth. So that is another kind of language. It's another kind of apprehension. And part of it requires another sense called interoception. Interoception is where, say, you get in the elevator in a big building, How many of you work in big buildings that have elevators? Anybody? It's not New York City, but 3 people in this whole group. That's why the Danes have a much better lifestyle than the Americans. So maybe I shouldn't use that analogy, but sometimes you get into a circumstance where people say, "Hi, how are you?" They don't actually know who you are, but maybe they've seen you around. "Hi, how are you?" And you say, "Fine." How do you know that? Of course you're going to say fine whether you're fine or not, because you don't want to tell them how you're really feeling. They don't have time. They don't want to know how you're really feeling. So there's an agreement that when you say, "Hi, how are you?" the answer is fine, because more than that would be a heavy emotional burden. But how do you know that you're fine? You introspect in no time. That's a sense. It's called interoception. And we now are beginning to unpack how the brain actually regulates all these senses. And of course, you're not just hearing me speak. There are all sorts of things going on here through the various senses that are allowing us to be in some kind of resonance or connection. And I must say, this theater is a fabulous place to have an evening like this, because I want you to sort of think about this evening. Maybe you already did, but I just want to underscore that it's not a talk or a performance by somebody named Jon Kabat-Zinn. It's a collective investigation or inquiry together. Or another way to put it would be, we will be actually experiencing an evening of practice in many different dimensions, some of which will be me talking, some of which will be maybe sort of a conversation where you'll be maybe not talking, because I don't think it's set up for Q&A, questions and answers and so forth, but that I want to feel, I would hope, to have a kind of intimacy here that reflects the intimacy of the structure itself, the room itself. This is a very, very intimate space, even though I have to use binoculars to see you. I can see you, actually, but I have to raise my head up like this, and you guys too. And if I sat on the floor, I think I'd lose some of you, and they was told to move back because otherwise you can't see me. I will move around on the stage, and I guess sometimes I'll stand because then we can be in. But the important thing is, I see this as an evening of being together. And probably there's some mystery associated with why each one of you is sitting in your seat. Because it can't possibly be that you came to see Jon Kabat-Zinn. It's like, there is no Jon Kabat-Zinn. And everything that I care about has to do with each one of us in some sense becoming or befriending who we actually are and learning how to live inside again. And Lona, I think, used the word rehabilitation when she was speaking about the sort of health and in particular mental health ramifications of mindfulness practice and training. I've come to see MBSR, this mindfulness-based stress reduction curriculum, as a rehabilitation, but not in the usual way the English use the word or the Americans use the word, which is to re-enable, but in the way the French root of the word means to habiter, means to live inside, to dwell. So rehabilitation would be to learn to live inside again. Okay? You don't agree with that? That's all right. I'm going to assert it. You're French, okay. But I'm talking about the root meaning. It's just sitting inside there. Habiter? What's that? It's ability. But it's also, habiter is also a root. It's the same hab. In Latin. Okay, so if you want to go to the Latin, I'm willing to drill down to the Indo-European if you want. But the fact is that there's this element that beyond re-enabling is in some sense, and ultimately maybe they converge, but to learn to live inside again. So the suggestion is when the body is broken or when something happens or the mind is broken or the heart is broken, how can we rehabilitate ourselves? And it's very different from fixing. Okay, so medicine doesn't have a lot of cures, modern medicine. But we make in English a very big distinction between healing and curing. And healing, in my working definition, is coming to terms with things as they are. And that means putting out the welcome mat for whatever arises, and sometimes whatever arises is seriously unwanted or traumatizing or horrific. And we could talk on a small individual person level, or we could talk on a larger societal level. And the interesting thing about what Lona mentioned about the parliament in the UK is that how many of you know anything about American politics and how much the Democrats and the Republicans like each other? Does anybody know anything about that? They don't like each other at all, okay? And you can see, if you've ever seen like the television of the parliamentary conversations, they're really nasty too. But they put out an all-party parliamentary report in October called A Mindful Nation. An all-party, that would be a tantamount to, Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders and everybody in between getting together and recommending mindfulness in the fields of education, healthcare, corporate innovation, and criminal justice. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And yet in the UK, over 200 people have taken an 8-week mindfulness-based program. And the waiting list to get in, just with members of the House of Lords and House of Commons, the waiting list is long. And the people who are teaching it are very, very deep Dharma practitioners. They didn't just kind of go to a weekend workshop and learn mindfulness from somebody who learned it the weekend before. And you laugh, but this is becoming a serious problem. So it's not all great that mindfulness is so in the mainstream, because what happens when it's in the mainstream is that everybody becomes an instant expert, and they forget that this is only the hardest thing in the world for human beings to cultivate. And some people are out there selling mindfulness and they can't even spell it. And I have no idea that it's a practice. It's something that one cultivates. And it does involve a huge degree of non-doing, of stillness, but a stillness that actually isn't fazed by challenges, by action, by working in the world. It's a stillness that's so deep that it's completely transparent. So what I thought we'd do tonight is kind of just, it's called An Evening with Jon Kabat-Zinn, and it says something about, like, you know, the science and the practice of mindfulness, and I'll weave all of those things together. So I guess you could think of this evening as kind of like an impressionistic painting. You know, you just throw a lot of paint up there, and if you step back at the right focal length, maybe you'll have something that you could apprehend that doesn't look like a Jackson Pollock. But I'm very, very deeply touched that we're all here together. And so I thought that it would be really nice. Well, let me just ask you, first of all, how many of you would say that you have a regular meditation practice? And I won't define regular too stringently. Raise your hands up high so I can actually feel the energy in the room. Whoa. So that's 75 or 80%. Do you realize that that's a kind of sociological phenomenon, and that would not have been true 30 or 40 years ago? Maybe even 10 years ago. It's really extraordinary. And that gives me also great hope, because I've been traveling around and supporting centers like the Danish Center for Mindfulness and other people around the world who are doing this kind of work. And thousands of people show up for these kind of evenings in all these different places. Like, this reminds me of the Folie Bergère. I gave a talk last year in Paris at, of all places, the Folie Bergère, which is about twice this capacity, but the same kind of intimacy. It's like on a weeknight, 2,000 people show up. And in London, and in Amsterdam, and in Brussels, and it's like, and in what's going on? What is going on? And I think what's going on is something very, very beautiful, is that we're beginning to realize that we need to bring being and doing into some kind of interactive harmony, or we get caught up in the doing to the point that we no longer even know what we're doing or who's doing all the doing. And also, we are so distracted now in this digital, digitized device age that we can always interrupt ourselves to see if there's not something more interesting happening on my phone. So, and we don't even let the impulse to do that register with us. So then that becomes a kind of new framework in which we are really cultivating a certain kind of mindlessness that's an out-of-body experience too, because we tune out the body enormously. So let's take some time now, if you are open to it. Would it be okay if we do some non-doing? So let's establish ourselves in a posture that embodies wakefulness and dignity, even at the end of a long workday. You notice I brought a meditation cushion and a zabuton in Japanese, sort of padding for the knees. And and I'm sitting on a chair. And I'm sitting on a chair in sympathy with you, because you're all sitting on chairs. There are certain virtues to sitting on the floor, but it's not essential, because the sitting is not what it's about. What it's about is dropping in on the full dimensionality of being. And sometimes that's called presence, and sometimes that's called silence, and sometimes that's called awareness. And sometimes it's called mindfulness because you can also think of mindfulness as awareness, pure awareness. Different traditions speak about it differently, even within the Buddhist framework, where mindfulness is spoken of as the heart of Buddhist meditation. But the different traditions understand that very differently. But the essence of it is pure awareness. And there are technical names for that. So it's not just a question of whether the attention is on or off an object of attention, the chosen object of attention. We're using the term in a much, much bigger way for all sorts of strategic reasons, with the aim of actually transforming the world. And I don't mean that in any kind of absurd or sort of egoic way, but to actually contribute to optimizing well-being on the planet and minimizing harm. In accordance with the Hippocratic Oath, which is where MBSR started out in healthcare and so forth, first, do no harm. So the cardinal principle of medicine, which is deeply connected to, in many ways, the entire ethical foundation of life itself, humanity itself, and also completely integral to the Bodhisattva vow, to all sorts of other ethical frameworks for conducting one's life to do as little damage and as much basic good as possible. But of course that requires understanding that they inter-are, as Thich Nhat Hanh says. So let's just, I think just for fun, and because this sometimes is kind of ritualistic, I will ring some bells and I'll invite you to follow the sound. Is it reaching up there? Do you hear anything? So just following the sound as it dissolves into the air. And of course we're drinking in the air as we sit here. So that's one aspect of present moment experience. Can we appreciate or experience the sensations associated with drinking in the air, even as we're bathing in a soundscape as well, because this room is full of sounds in addition to my voice. So for now, for this moment, could we just feature the breath sensations moving in and out of the body as we sit here, center stage, in the field of your own awareness. The invitation is to not push the breath or pull the breath, but let the breath do itself. And we just ride on the wave, so to speak, of the breath with full awareness. And we rest in that awareness. So that it's not really about the breath, that's the object of attention, but it's the attending that is always most important, the quality of mind that is attending And we call that awareness. And we're not striving for any kind of special experience. We're simply sitting here. And the breath is moving out, in and out of the body, and there's the knowing of that. It just doesn't get any more special than that. So what's ordinary is actually extraordinary. What's seemingly, special is right here in this moment. So we don't have to strive or try to attain any special state or outcome of this kind of practice. We just invite ourselves to be awake. And in this wakefulness, we can play, we can experiment. One of the ways in which we can do it is see if the awareness could actually expand in this moment, if you care to, around the breath sensations in the body until it includes a sense of the body as a whole sitting here breathing. And listening to my voice and having people on either side of you and maybe in front of you and back of you. So then awareness of the body as a whole, sitting and breathing. And it's the same awareness. The object is now slightly enlarged, but the awareness, same. And can you actually reside in this? So you can investigate right here in this moment. With nothing next having to happen. Life unfolding in the form of everything here and now. In the domain of your experience. So there's a certain ease to this and a certain intimacy to this, which is infinitely available, infinitely accessible. Right here, underneath my words. If my words are sort of too many words, drop underneath where the words are pointing. To a silence that's not so easily disturbed, or maybe disturbable. And that's already yours, so it's not something you have to acquire, it's something that you befriend. So fully embodied, the awareness filling the body, including the envelope of the skin, right down to the awareness of one's bones. And we might even expand the field of awareness to include sounds or the spaces between them, which would of course include these words of mine, my words, because I'm just wagging my tongue. And in concert with moving the air out of my lungs, over my vocal cords and moving my mouth and lips, I'm actually generating waves in the air that are coming to your eardrums, vibrating the tympanic membrane, generating impulses that are decoded in the auditory cortex and then all sorts of other areas of the cortex, and you're actually following the sentence. And if that's not miraculous, I don't know what is. So there's hearing. So can you include hearing in the space of awareness? There's hearing and the knowing of hearing. Sounds, and the spaces between them, and the silence underneath and inside. All sound. Right here. Same awareness. So most of you have been meditating for a very long time, but even so, I mean, it doesn't take long if you're a beginning meditator to discover that the mind has a life of its own, and so it will not necessarily follow my instructions or your own inclinations, and it will generate a lot of thoughts. Patterns in the mind. And that can carry away from our attending. We're fully present with the breath, or with this breath coming in, this breath coming out, or a sense of the body as a whole sitting, or hearing, just hearing what's here to be heard. And then all of a sudden, we're in the past, or in the future, or in a restaurant, or in bed, or caught up someplace or other. Because the mind, thinking is so powerful that it's like a stream, and once we fall into it, but at a certain moment, you'll notice, oh, I'm not on the attended object of attention, so you come back. And now we can open up to seeing thoughts as like weather patterns in the mind, or events in the field of awareness. So they're not any more problematic than sensations in the body. Even unpleasant sensations in the body. I didn't mention this, but if you have sensations in the body that are unwanted, that are unpleasant, you can play with being in possible relationship with them that might actually transform how they are and how you are in relationship to them. And there, you can go to the literature and search on Google for mindfulness and chronic pain and find all sorts of studies that are investigating this now at a level that was unthinkable in 1982 when I published the first paper on mindfulness and chronic pain. Just unbelievable the kind of levels of research that are going on. So we can attend to experience whether it's pleasant, whether it's unpleasant, or whether it's neither pleasant or unpleasant, and just be the knowing of all of that. It's called awareness. No big deal, and a huge deal. And it's right here. And so when the mind goes off, sooner or later, awareness will notice what's on your mind. That's a beautiful, intimate moment. You see what's on your mind. And in that seeing is mindfulness. That seeing is awareness. So it's the same awareness as if you were with the breath or the body or sounds or whatever. So we don't have to be distracted by our thoughts or emotions. We can see them as weather patterns or events arising, passing, arising, passing, but some of them unbelievably powerful and unwanted and persistent and that revisit you constantly and that you can't get rid of, if you know what I'm talking about. And so Lona was speaking about depression and the colossal toll that depression takes on our societies. And these are dysregulation of thought patterns that can be healed, attenuated, transformed by how you decide to be in relationship to these tiny little secretions that even neuroscientists have no idea what they are, that we call thoughts, and that are freighted with incredible emotion. So now you may, at this point, be wondering whether, hey, did he not ring the bells and I didn't hear it, and this is no longer a meditation, but he's giving a talk or whatever, and it's like, this is the meditation. We're just resting in awareness, and what's happening is happening. Want more silence? Okay. But what I'm trying to do, and most of you know this, of course, because you've been living it for 30, 40, 50 years and studying with great teachers, is sort of just mapping, sort of at some level of resolution, the landscape of the mind, of the heart, of the body, and of the world. Is the distinction between inner and outer is a mere abstraction. It's like, but when we know ourselves through the kind of intimacy of attending in this way, without this narcissistic self-involvement and generating narratives about how horrible we are, how wonderful we are, then our instrument actually resonates with other instruments and we can be more empathic with others. And compassion naturally arises because there's more of a sympathetic resonance with the other when we understand the depths of suffering in ourselves and the root causes of suffering, which we can see in ourselves all the time, And even better if they're pointed out, if it's hard sometimes to recognize them, but you get shown by other people who love what this is. So now let's just expand the field of awareness beyond thoughts and emotions to include awareness itself. Like, can we just allow awareness? Can we investigate awareness with awareness? And one thing you might just investigate right in this moment is, can you find the center of awareness? Just investigate, see. Not through thinking. We're not talking about, this has nothing to do with thinking. This has to do with seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, apprehending, awareness itself. Find the periphery of awareness. Where does it end? What's the circumference of your awareness? A little mysterious, huh? Maybe it's as big as you want it to be. Maybe it's bigger than you can even conceive of it being. It's interesting to explore, since this is a faculty that is the only faculty powerful enough to hold thinking. Our precocious, creative, destructive, or imprisoning sometimes habits of thought, and apprehend their actuality and not be caught by them, is this other faculty that we were born with and never get any training in. We don't need training in like making our awareness better. What we need training in is recognizing awareness itself. That it's the access that we need to cultivate, access to wakefulness, to awareness. And we don't get that kind of training in our careers, in our training, in our schooling, but it's here for us. So we don't actually have to acquire anything new, special skill, have to develop it. No, it's ours. And it can make all the difference in the possibility of living our lives as if they really mattered. And finding out in some way what our karmic assignment is on the planet, if I could put it that way, or what our job on the planet is with a capital J. And where the heart is inclined. And how deeply we can apprehend interconnectedness. And how the stories we tell ourselves on the thought side are just that, they're thought narratives that just love the personal pronouns. Me, my favorite subject. My life, my triumphs, my needs, my suffering. I, me, my, mine. Maybe that could be investigated. Who is claiming that? Who am I? Investigate. Are you your name? Are you your age? That's just the number of times the planet has gone around the sun since you were born. Nowadays, big. Are you your gender? I mean, we're beginning to think about gender in ways that, like, I never thought about gender before. I thought there was like male and female, well, you know. But no, and biologically speaking, why should there be? I mean, it's complicated. It's complicated. But when we fall into kind of rigid categorizations, one thing we can be sure of is that's not the whole story. And in fact, what we have managed to do so much of the time in our culture is to generate stories about ourselves that are just too small. They're just not accurate, big enough to respond to that inquiry, what am I? Who am I? Actually, when you drop underneath the name and the form and the age and the identification with the accomplishments and everything else, now, right in this moment, who are you? Without the narrative. Maybe you're more akin to awareness itself. Maybe you always have been. I don't know, but you could entertain the possibility. And if you're sitting on the cushion, or on a chair, or living your life as if it really mattered, then the real meditation practice isn't sitting on the cushion. Is this important? Yes. Is it important to go off on retreats with lots of different kinds of teachers and hear how they articulate this? Yes. And to make time for it and to sort of make space for it and then be open enough to, but every single one of those retreats, you know who you're going to encounter on that retreat? You. Oh no. I went to Tibet, I went to Thailand, I went to, Timbuktu, and who do I find? Jesus, myself, I get on the cushion and it's like the same old I, me, my spiritual life, my spiritual life, and how great it is or how inadequate I am, and now everybody else is enlightened, but somehow I missed out on the lottery. These narratives are really doubtful, but they're also really toxic, and they take us away from who we actually are. I trained once with a Korean Zen master, and And he was a very colorful character who never bothered to really learn English, especially English grammar or anything like that. So sometimes he would wear these robes, and he had a bald head and a gnarly Zen stick, you know, made out of some tree root. And he would sit on the cushion, and he'd sit up straight in his robes, and he would imitate for his students how they should meditate. And of course, thousands of different meditation techniques. So this is just one, but it's one that they do a lot in the Chan tradition or the Zen tradition. And that is to ask yourself, who am I? It's also Ramana Maharshi's sadhana. So he would sit up in his robes, and you have to imagine a round face, shaved head, imposing, and he would scrunch up his face like this in a kind of quizzical look, because he's going to ask the question. And he says, and he didn't have it, who am I? He spoke of it as, what am I? So he would say, what am I? And then his face would kind of open a little and then get much more puzzled looking, and he'd say, don't know. Don't know. But he had a point. Maybe that's a great answer. Who are you? Don't know. And if you say it with a Korean accent, I mean, so much the better, you know. It's like, but you know, sometimes we know so much that we don't know what we don't know, and we don't bother to even investigate how little we know. Any great scientist, and I have to genuflect to Copenhagen as the home of Niels Bohr, and many other great scientists. So any great scientist is really aware of how easy it is for your mind to know so much that you can't use it anymore, because it's imprisoned in what it knows. And it's really important to keep an open mind. That means a mind that doesn't know. Okay? Because how are you going to apprehend the next insight if you are so opinionated that it prevents you from seeing what's right under your nose? So there are many, many people who have not won the Nobel Prize, who have friends who've won the Nobel Prize, and they say, why didn't I see that? Good question. Why didn't I see that? Sometimes it's because the patterns of mind become kind of imprisoning. And you need to kind of really stay in not knowing to apprehend that eureka moment, that aha, that insight, that seeing what's already here, but that until you see it, you don't see it. And that could be, in some sense, your default mode. Instead of going around knowing everything, maybe you could go around not knowing so much. Or at least not believing everything that your narrative is saying how you know. And a lot of it's very negative, too. How depressed I am, how bad I am as a person, how unlovable, unworthy. These aren't truths until we believe them, and then they become like prison bars. And in any moment of seeing, the prison bars evaporate, dissolve. And if you continue to recognize those bars as they reappear, because they reappear all the time, they're very sticky, you actually cultivate freedom. And we see this in our medical patients all the time. They are not coming to the UMass Medical Center because they want enlightenment. Thank God. They're coming because they're in pain. They're in pain. And they've been through every medical treatment and most other kinds of psychological or psychiatric treatments, and they have not gotten what they wanted. In many, many instances in medicine, people fall through the cracks of healthcare and medicine. And that was why I set up the stress reduction clinic in 1979, to catch people falling through the cracks of the healthcare system and challenge them to do something for themselves that no one else on the planet can do for you. Using these Buddhist meditative practices that come from the Buddhist tradition, but in their more universal aspects, so without a lot of the languaging, but not by simply stealing or abstracting or decontextualizing or robbing sort of what we liked or preferred and leaving all the rest as hocus pocus. No. But understanding that in essence, that Dharma is one Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha or the lawfulness of the universe, and that if we actually cultivate the muscle, if we exercise the muscle of mindfulness or mindful awareness or awareness itself or heartfulness, because in Asian languages, the word for mind and word for heart is the same word. So if you don't understand mindfulness is compassion, you're not understanding. That doesn't mean there aren't specialized ways of cultivating compassion or generosity or sort of kindness or anything else. I mean, in fact, there are, and we use them even in MBSR. But it's all under this umbrella that we call mindfulness, which is basically the liberative potential of wakefulness, embodied wakefulness, and that it's worthy of scientific investigation. And it's not just us that think that. The Dalai Lama is deeply into and open to, investigating what meditation is all about in his various traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. And a lot of monks have been going into the laboratory and, practicing various kinds of meditation practices and trying to find a way of languaging them that's not Tibetan and that's not even Buddhist. Why? Because, it's not just Buddhists on the planet that are suffering. And so the Buddhists feel like if we've discovered something that's of universal importance, does it make any sense, even from a Buddhist perspective, to keep it to ourselves? And of course, you can get attached, to even your own way of understanding non-attachment. I don't know if you got that one, but and if and attachment is in terms of the Four Noble Truths, it's the self-identification, the attachment, the clinging that is the root cause of suffering. So it's not an abstraction, it's like right here. How am I going to be in relationship to what I want, what I don't want, and what I don't even notice because it's not even in my narrative? Are you following this? Is it making any sense to you? So we started writing scientific papers and putting them in the medical literature. The first one in 1982 about people with chronic pain conditions who were not getting satisfaction from all sorts of medical treatments, high-tech medical treatments, nerve blocks, pain clinic stuff, all sorts of things like that. And then 8 weeks of mindfulness training, and they're actually doing things they weren't able to do before and reporting less pain. And now we can look at their brains, and their brains are actually changed. 8 weeks of mindfulness actually transformed the brain in various ways. And not just like how its activity at the electronic level, but actually its real estate, the structure of the brain, the levels of connectivity changing. There are just two recent papers by a fellow named Fadel Zaidan at Wake Forest University, young neuroscientists. Interesting thing about this whole thing is that the neuroscientists now, the young ones, they all started out as meditators. Then they went into neuroscience because they wanted to actually have another angle on their meditation practice, and also saw that as a way to interrogate, this is a word that scientists use, and police, interrogate the brain, find out how it operates. And so there's this new phenomenon that we've in some sense encouraged through something called the Mind and Life Institute, where we were giving grants for the past 15 or 20 years to young neuroscientists and young clinicians doing MBSR, and they are bringing this into the laboratories of these big shot scientists, and all of a sudden it has a legitimacy it didn't have before. And if you plot the curve of papers in the medical literature with the word mindfulness in the title, okay, so it's a very stringent screen for this, only in the medical and scientific literature, not in the popular press. The curve looks like this. It starts out, in the early 80s with a few papers, some years no papers. Most of those papers we were writing, and then over time, a few other places got interested, started doing studies, started publishing those studies. And then about the year 2000, 2001, 2002, it starts to go up. The number of papers starts to go up. That was when mindfulness-based cognitive therapy came out. And John Teasdale from the Cambridge University and Mark Williams now at Oxford University and Zindel Siegel from the University of Toronto, three of the top cognitive theorists and cognitive therapists in the world, cognitive scientists, they developed this mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for major depressive disorder, modeled entirely on MBSR. They are like what I call kissing cousins. And when they are both at their best, there's 95% overlap. They're not that different. But they, being rigorous scientists, were able to demonstrate that people with 3 or more episodes of major clinical depression, and that means like, a kind of depression that lasts to the point where you need hospitalization, where you can't get up in the morning, where you are just like in a black hole of despair with no energy. And if you have had 3 or more of those, the more you have, by the way, the more likely you are to have another one. So that it's like a huge medical burden, psychological burden, and economic burden on the society throughout the world, in third world countries and in first world countries. And when you train in mindfulness for 8 weeks, it actually cuts in half the relapse rate of depression after 3 episodes. And that relapse rate is 95%. It's almost certain that you'll have. So this is, in some sense, a kind of new way of being in relationship to an illness where you're not taking a drug for it. You're rearranging your circuitry, but on a much more holistic level, the most interesting thing is you're recognizing who you are in a new way and understanding that your thoughts about who you are not who you are. And that's like, in some sense, touching soap bubbles. The thoughts are like soap bubbles. They're very blanking on the word, but it's like ephemeral. They're very ephemeral. You touch a soap bubble, and what happens? Touch a thought and awareness, and what happens? If I were to ask you to now, we're still in the meditation, of course, sit down and be aware of your thoughts. A typical thing is like, as soon as I try to be aware of my thoughts, there are no thoughts. So that's one. Where are all these thoughts when I want them? Okay, that's 2. And they can get more and more subtle. So when you start to befriend or cultivate intimacy with your own interior experience, who's doing that? Who is cultivating the intimacy? Who is attending to thinking? Here we are. Okay. And this is highly functional because, as I said, the real meditation practice is not sitting on the cushion or, going into sort of deep states of one-pointedness or sustained wakefulness. It's this moment and this moment and this moment in everyday life, that life unfolding, and that's the real meditation practice, how we live our lives. I said before, remember in the early stage of this dangling meditation that I'll bet you haven't noticed in a while that you're breathing. Have you? Here you are listening to me, and the breath is like, long gone. Hope you're still breathing. If anybody is not breathing, come and see me at the end. We need to have a serious talk. So, but I said during the guided meditation on the breath awareness, like that don't push the breath, don't pull the breath, just let the breath do itself. The fact of the matter is the breath is always doing itself unless we get in the way. And I did not say you're breathing. I said the breathing. Why? Because if truth be told, if it was up to you to be doing the breathing, you would have died ages ago. Your phone would have gone off. Whoops, oh my God, somebody texted me, or my Facebook page just went offline, and whoops, dead. Lost touch with the breath. So the phrenic nerve and the brainstem, then the diaphragm, they don't allow you anywhere, whoever you think you are, they don't allow you anywhere near the breath. They will give you the illusion that, yes, you can hold your breath if you want, for a little bit. But even though you mentioned and it's horrible, the high suicide rate among young people, you cannot commit suicide by holding your breath. You just can't. Because that's not an allowable function. The biology is way too smart to let you anywhere near your breathing. And the heart even more so. Because you are totally unreliable. Whoever you are, you're totally unreliable when it comes to your own phrenic nerve and brainstem and generating breath movement with the diaphragm. Just hopeless. And if you sort of take what I'm saying the way I'm meaning it, you'll see that this applies to virtually everything. We are hardly ever present. We're always in the future or in the past. We're distracting one way or another. Where did I even put my phone? Oh yeah, I left it in my backpack. But you see people walking down the street like this. This is a new hand gesture. And you all know what it is, right? You all know what it is. And very often they're doing this, or you don't even see this, they put it in their pocket, but they're talking to themselves. They would have been locked up in mental institutions 30 or 40 years ago, but now it's just, they're on their phone. So I wrote a book called Wherever You Go, There You Are, but it's becoming less and less true. But I always knew that, because I could have called the book equally well, Wherever You Go, There You're Not, because we're always not really there. And if we were there, we wouldn't even call it there. We'd call it here. We'd chop the T off. So this can actually become an art form. And I'm guessing, I would like to have a conversation with you. I don't know if there are microphones to be able to do that, but let's figure out if we can have a little bit of a conversation without getting it too wild, an intimate conversation with 1,000 people. But the only reason I'm here giving this talk is to, in some sense, play with you around life and death issues. Very serious questions of living our lives as if they really mattered. Not to fulfill some great ego satisfaction, but to simply keep in mind that ego is just the Latin personal pronoun for I, the first person. And when Freud wrote all his stuff and brought out that stuff, he actually wrote it in German. I don't know if you know that, but Freud wrote in German. Of course you know that. We're in Europe, where people know things like that. But because you're educated. I come from the barbaric other side, you know. But you know, when he was translated into English in the UK, they translated Freud as, you know, every time he spoke about das Ich, they translated as the I, the personal pronoun I. But when they translated it from German to American, the I wasn't good enough. They had to use a Latin form of I, the ego, and generate this, reify this new entity. But it's just your crummy old personal pronoun, das Ich. And this is really worthy of investigating. Who is speaking? Who is hearing? Who is knowing? Who is breathing? Who is living? And are you? No joke. Because we only get a certain number of breaths and then we're out of here. And if you start to pay attention, which is what mindfulness invites, see how many of your moments you just go by with no awareness whatsoever. And if you don't even have training in the cultivation of mindfulness, then it could be years. It could be like children come and go and you don't even know who your children are. Of course, you'll never know who your children are, but at least you'll know that you don't know if you pay attention, and maybe you'll know something of who they are, or who you're even sleeping with. That was a joke, but I guess it didn't go over in Danish. And you know and you don't know who you're married to. But the depth of relationality requires cultivation. And that cultivation is called meditation. It's called mindfulness. It's like, it's about relationality. How I relate to I, or this, or breath, or thoughts, or emotions, or you, or the globe. And what we know intellectually, like even that the world has developed a fever because of our precocity as a species. And that in our precocity, we are actually creating an impossible living situation where, I don't know if you've seen the time-lapse photographs of the glaciers over the past 60 or 70 years, but they're going. And the polar ice caps are going. So when are we going to wake up? We're the species that calls ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens, the species that knows and knows that it knows, from the Latin sapere, which means to taste or to know, okay? Where's my friend? Oh, he left. I was going to get a Latin confirmation, but he got bored. And boredom is another very interesting mind state. Very interesting mind state. So, like, you know, a lot of people say, well, I'd meditate more, but it's so bloody boring to watch my mind. It's actually not boring to watch the mind. I mean, it's not even boring to watch boredom. As soon as you start to attend to boredom, it gets incredibly interesting. And you can say, like, who's bored, by the way? And what is missing? That's a beautiful koan. What is missing? Now. What would make you more whole now? Is it even possible to make you more whole if you are already whole? And you're just not recognizing that. And don't forget, wholeness is the root meaning of the word health, the root meaning of the word healing, the root meaning of the word holy. So, if we're the species that knows and knows that it knows, that's a pretty highfalutin assertion. A certain level of arrogance. Or maybe aspiration. That would it be so that we were the species that knows and knows that it knows? It would be this homo awareness. Okay? But we don't know the territory of awareness because we have not been, until recently, on a global level, investigating awareness itself. And now we have an opportunity because somehow that curve in medicine and healthcare, that's gone up and up, accelerated by all sorts of things, including the neuroscience, including the media getting a hold of it, including the fact that people want to monetize it and make money out of mindfulness. And I mean, it's like all sorts of colossal, stuff that's inevitable in a capitalist country when anything. But hopefully that will dissolve soon because there's so many of us that actually meditate. We're not in it, to generate more stuff. We're in it to liberate ourselves in some profound way from our own greed, hatred, and delusion. Not just individually, but societally. Not just societally, planetarily, and maybe in time to not harm life that hasn't even come onto the planet yet, like our grandchildren or our grandchildren's grandchildren. And do we have any responsibility for that once we know that these things are happening? That's got to be part of the curriculum of mindfulness too. And it's not going to take one hero, one Niels Bohr, one Albert Einstein, one whoever. It's going to take every single one of us in our own creative ways, which we, the world is dying for us to wake up. And not tell ourselves one more romantic story about mindfulness either. So that's why I practice. Because I love it. It's a love affair with life as far as I can see. Of course, I've been meditating formally ever since I was 22 years old, and so that's almost 50 years. And it took me a long time to actually realize that when I take my seat in formal meditation, it's actually a radical act of love. It's the assertion that if one person sits down and drops from doing into being, and then rests in that boundless spaciousness that awareness already is, in some profound, although minuscule way, the crystal lattice structure of the universe is different because you've chosen to pay attention. And everything that follows from systematically nurturing attention and what emerges from attention, which is wakefulness and heartfulness. And that's a radical act of love. Not self-love, not self-preoccupation, not centeredness, but actually no centeredness. And there's an element of beauty in that that's at least as beautiful as the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. And I think those early quantum physicists, they were deeply touched by what they were discovering, and it's not that different from the sort of mystery of knowing. Because it went way beyond concepts. Their concepts were shattered. Like physics was like never recovered. And it still hasn't recovered. It's had real problems now because there used to be something called the universe. Now do you know that serious cosmologists and scientists who are way smarter than any of us will ever be, they think that like there's not one universe, there are an infinite number of universes. Infinite means like you can't imagine. And that they all have different physics, different properties. So it's more like they're listening than they're looking. They're waiting there for a wave to perturb space-time. Get this, space-time, so that the laser light would register a time difference between going this way and going that way. On the order of, or the distance between the mirrors, on the order of 1/10,000th of the width of a proton. If you're not following me or you wonder what this has to do with mindfulness, don't give it another thought. Don't worry about it. And what they found was that sometime in September, they got a signal in one of these observatories. Now, you'd think that they would only need one observatory. I mean, that's already $20 billion. Why would they build two? Because if they got a signal here, they wouldn't know whether it was noise or not. They had to build the second one, 2,000 miles apart, and that would say, if the signal's here and the signal's here, at virtually the same time, then it's real. And they detected that in October, a hiccup or a fluctuation in space-time. I think that's pretty cool. and 1,000 scientists' names on the paper. So that's a kind of collective enterprise, like, you know, they required a lot of cooperativity. Human beings are capable of amazing things. And this was exactly 100 years after Einstein sitting in the patent office, you know, or wherever he was when he did it. I mean, just using his mind, came up with the most transformative understanding of the physical universe. And then 100 years later, they proved it again. Like, you know, it's like so amazing. And so my point in telling you this story, if I can understand it myself, is that we're living in a universe that is really, really magical. And inside our own head, right underneath the cranium here, the skull, inside here is the most complex arrangement of matter in the known by us universe. I'm not talking about other universes, other multiverses. I'm talking about this one here and this planet. This is the most elaborate, complex structure in the universe, within many thousands of light years, probably. Over, say, nobody's actually been in there and counted them, but the estimates are between 100 and 200 billion neurons with hundreds of trillions of connections in the synapses and so forth. And then, as many neurons as there are also an equal number of glial cells in there, in the brain, and no one knows what they're doing. Although they're hoping that they think they're keeping the neurons happy, whatever that means. You want your neurons to be happy, and I'll tell you, one way you can get your neurons to be happy is just this. Your neurons will just be like, I'm not saying that's a good reason to meditate, but that is a consequence of it, because the fact is that we are miraculous beings. We have an equipment that is like unbelievable. We're the species that knows and knows that it knows. Maybe we can live our way into that name that we gave ourselves 150 years ago in time to actually wake up to the fragility and the beauty and the possibility of life on this planet so that we don't destroy it. Just maybe. And even in a sort of more micro scale, so that we're happier, so that we feel more fulfilled, not by more doing, but by recognizing beauty. The beauty of interconnectedness, of interbeing. And we're the only species, as far as we know, who does that. You know, elephants, of course, do it, and, you know, sort of dolphins and so forth. But no one does it like we do it. And we're killing off the elephants and the dolphins anyway. And, you know, like, come on. When are we going to wake up? And so it's not about inaction. It's about letting our doing come out of being. And when it comes out of being, it's quite remarkable doing. It's an art form, it's a love affair, and it can take any number of ways. It could be music, it could be painting, it could be theater, it could be, you know, ballet, it could be, you know, sports, you know. I don't know if you heard of Michael Jackson or Kobe Bryant, or have you ever, do you know those names, Michael Jackson, Kobe Bryant? See, we're living in an international age. And so I don't know if you know it, but they're all mindfulness. They're mindfulness practitioners. The National Basketball Association trains in mindfulness. Steph Curry and the Oakland Warriors. Mindfulness is one of the 4 principal training factors. I'm not saying that if you meditate, you're going to be able to shoot baskets the way Steph Curry shoots baskets from three-point land. But it's interesting that those very, very tall multi-millionaires, they get their butt on the cushion. And it's partly, yeah, because they're very competitive. And even though they're very tall and they're very good at what they do, they want to be better at what they do. And they know that means letting their doing come out of being. Because if it comes out of just doing, out of striving, out of the head, it doesn't work as well. And 5 people on a basketball court, when there are 5 people on a basketball court, it doesn't work so well. When there are 5 minds that are completely interconnected in the bodies with a kind of awareness of where the other 5 people are as well, where the baskets are, the interesting things happen. Now, am I saying that's a reason to meditate? No. But it might be inspiring to certain kids on the street, especially, you know, African American kids in major American cities which are, you know, on fire, metaphorically if not literally all the time, and where they can't relate to anything, but they can relate to Kobe Bryant, and they find out, oh, they do that, then maybe we can do that. It could be the opening to, like, you know, reclaiming their own lives, rehabilitating themselves, learning how to live inside of sometimes very, very difficult social circumstances that predispose people to wind up in prison. And my society imprisons more people in our country than ever happened in apartheid South Africa or the Soviet Union. We are the champions of throwing people in prison and keeping them there for longer and longer. So that's why we need to wake up, you know, in my country. What you do, I don't know. But, you know, I mean, it's almost like, feels to me like going to some heaven realm when I visit Denmark. You know? I know it can't possibly be true. But I want to acknowledge how beautiful it is that you've come out tonight. And so I'd like to, entertain the possibility in the last few minutes of the time we have before we move into some other kind of very bizarre ritual, which is called a book signing. For anybody who's crazy enough to want to get online to have a book signed by me, you don't need, I wrote the book, That's good enough. You don't need to have it signed by me. Here, John, it's yours. But I do feel there's some sort of deep, deep connection that we already have. So book signing is not necessary, but it's also lovely because I like to meet the people who read books that when I'm writing them, I don't know you. So there's something very nice about that from my point of view. And actually, since today I think is the first day that a book that my wife Mila and I wrote together on something we haven't discussed this evening is mindfulness in families or mindful parenting. We did a workshop on that this morning, as I said, in Odense. So she'll be here too, and if you want that parenting book signed, she'll sign it, and I'll sign it. And put a little stamp in your book. And I'll tell you, because there's too many people, if you all want a book signed, forget about it. And and they're selling too many different books, so we could be here for 3 weeks. So, but I'm gonna tell you, I have a stamp that I like to put in people's books, aside from signing them, and I'll tell you what the stamp says. And just take that, and because the message is really meant to be a reminder of what you already know. And what's in the books, and the reason even write books, And it says this: may your mindfulness practice continue to grow and flower and nourish your life and work from moment to moment and from day to day. So your mindfulness practice is your mindfulness practice. It may be different from somebody else's mindfulness practice, or it may be the same. Your sources may be different from other people's sources, but it's the same deep underlying well. And the important thing is not to get caught up and attached to name and form, or my meditation's better than your meditation, but to actually give yourself over to the actuality of life unfolding in the only moment you ever have, any of us ever have, this one. So Henry David Thoreau, who's one of our famous philosophers and naturalists, and he's famous for having gone to a place in Massachusetts, Concord, Massachusetts, called Walden Pond, built a little house there, and lived there for 2 years. And he wrote a book called Walden about that experience, what it would be like to, and this was in the 1830s, in the farm country in eastern Massachusetts. So 1830, things were very different in Denmark and in Massachusetts from the way they are now. There were no iPhones, But even then, he felt like village life was a little too oppressive, so he went off to the woods. And he said this about it: I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front, which means to confront, to experience, to front only those facts. Went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only those facts of life and see if I could not learn what they had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. Okay, so that's it. That's pretty important. Not when I came to die. On your deathbed, you wake up and you realize, oh my God, I got the whole curriculum wrong. Don't do that. Die now. In this moment. Get it over with. And then the rest of your life free. die to the personal pronouns. It doesn't mean you can't use them. It doesn't mean you have to give away your credit cards or your house. But it isn't your house. That's another fiction that's legalized, you know, and so forth. But we can ask, like, it's your house for now. Well, why not appreciate it now? They're your children for now. Why not appreciate them for now? In the now. In the timeless moment we call now. And the same for yourself and for your body and for those you love and for the earth and for whatever. So here, it's dangerous to use poetry across cultures because, you know, but I think the Danes, your English is so good that I'll attempt the impossible. There's a poet named Derek Walcott who won the Nobel Prize, who is from the island of St. Lucia in the Caribbean. And he wrote a poem that I especially love. Those of you who've been on retreat with me know that this poem because I love it. And it's called Love After Love. And it goes like this. Let me just say one thing before I recite the poem. Have you ever had the feeling that, like, you didn't like yourself? So that's interesting, right? There's a part of you that's likable that doesn't like the part of you that's not likable. But they're both you. So sometimes we do that. We split. And we could bring awareness to that and recognize that there's no splitting at all. The awareness doesn't split. So this poem is about that. The time will come when, with elation, which means great joy, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror. And each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. I'll repeat that. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to yourself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, who you have ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit. Feast on your life. So let's sit for a few moments and feast. Sitting here on this stage, you know, with all the light and stuff like that, I see you and I can feel you. And it feels to me as if we've in some sense been beating with one heart this evening. I could be deluded, but it feels that way to me. And it's deeply, deeply moving. I know I'm going to see some of you tomorrow in a day of practice. But I want to say to all of you that if anything here has resonated with your original impulse for coming, anything at all, recognize that. Trust it. Nurture it. Inquire into it. And see whether that doesn't, in some sense, nourish you, grow your practice, grow your love in ways that are deeply satisfying. Deeply, deeply satisfying. And if they are deeply, deeply satisfying, they will be healing. They will be transformative. It's just like that. The biology is like that. And the universe is like that. Thank you.